All right, now to give us more insights in terms of what the Russian game plan has been, in terms of how it is going about its offensive, we're joined in by international affairs expert Stephen Golub, who's joining us live from California. Mr. Golub, the latest information that has now come in is that there is a fire that has been reported at a nuclear power facility in Ukraine. This is said to be the largest nuclear power facility. Is this deliberate that the Russians have been trying to target these nuclear power plants inside of Ukraine? There are a total of 15 of them.
Well, you would assume that the Russians remember Chernobyl and what a disaster that was and what a huge threat that was, and it's still not completely cleaned up. All these years later, these reports of the fire there are initial. It's extremely worrisome. Anytime there's a fire anywhere near a nuclear plant, we can only hope that this is such a large facility that perhaps the fire is going on in a place that doesn't threaten the reactors and that doesn't threaten nuclear leakage and contamination and radiation getting out into the air, which could affect not just Ukraine, but surrounding countries. If I recall correctly from the Chernobyl accident, and I'm not sure I am, the winds were blowing towards the west, that is towards Sweden, towards Northern Europe, and they, I would think, would be extremely concerned right now, as we all should be.
And also looking in terms of how this Russian offensive has gone on so far, many people have said that Russia made sluggish progress to begin with, but it is now clearly upping the ante. It has managed to capture Kherson in the southeast of Ukraine. It has upped the offensive in Mariupol. And with this, it is trying to get a corridor connecting Donbas to Crimea. Is that a clear game plan that Russia is at this point of time aiming for?
It seems that way. The fact that the progress has been slowed further north is still significant and even curious given the massive Russian forces that have been brought together. The Ukrainians seem to have had some success in attacking their supply lines of fuel, maybe food, otherwise to slow them down. Remember, just the other day, there was a report of a 40-mile-long convoy of tanks and armored personnel carriers and other equipment making its way towards Kiev, and it's still not there. So yes, they're making some progress in the south. That's significant, but in the bigger picture, it's also significant that the progress in the north just hasn't unfolded the way clearly Mr. Putin hoped it would.
And at this point of time, looking at how things have unfolded for the Russians, and I want you to give a comparison in terms of how some of the wars in the past have gone. When the United States invaded Iraq back in 2003, it took the American forces with such incredible air power that they deployed more than a month, 1 month, 1 week and 4 days. Here we are on the 9th day of Russia's invasion, and they seem to have made a lot of progress, and they've also not deployed their air power to the extent that they could have. Do you think at this point of time the Russians are slowly beginning to tighten the screws and could resort to using more force if they want a quick capitulation from Kiev?
Well, that's a good point. It would be a little too complex for me to get into a direct comparison between Iraq and Ukraine and the U.S. and the Russians at this point. But it's a fair observation to make. I think there were aspects of the U.S. advance into Iraq which were lightning quick. But be that as it may, another lesson to be learned from the U.S. presence in Iraq, and for that matter, both the U.S. and Russian presence in Afghanistan, is that conquering a country may be relatively quick, relatively easy, but holding on, suppressing an insurgency, maintaining control over the entire country, and avoiding suffering really significant losses over the course of months and years is another matter. So however fast or slowly Russia advances, and it does seem to have advanced more slowly than it had anticipated, The challenge for Russia will really only begin if and when they conquer much or all of Ukraine.
But looking at how things go, and that's an interesting point that you made, because once they capture a nation, then they would be stuck and bogged down with an insurgency, and getting out from there would be much more difficult. Is that the reason why, do you think, the Russian column of 40-mile-long tanks, artillery and other logistical supplies is still camping outside of Kiev and has not launched a full-scale invasion into the capital city?
Well, that's a good question. That's an interesting point. I would have thought that it would be in Russia's interest, in Vladimir Putin's interest. This war is not in Russia's interest at all, but it would have been in Vladimir Putin's interest to make a lightning strike, advance as quickly as possible, overwhelm the Ukrainian defenses as effectively as possible, both in terms of trying to minimize its own losses and also to minimize the condemnation, not minimize, but at least get the initial stage of the war out of the way so that the condemnation from the world won't be so ongoing in the middle of a military campaign. There will be condemnation regardless. So I would think that the plan was to move in as fast as possible. The assumption was there wouldn't be that much Ukrainian resistance. Both of those items have proven, or approaches have proven unfounded, and it's not, sooner or later, unfortunately, Russia will probably be able to crush Ukraine unless some diplomatic way, face-saving way is found out of out of this for Putin, and it's hard to see what that will be. But after it does crush Ukraine, there's still going to be very, very ugly, first and foremost for the Ukrainians, but also for the Russians, from a different point of view in terms of holding on to what they've conquered.
Absolutely, indeed. And my last question to you is, there's a lot of diplomatic effort from the West that is ongoing. We expect Anthony Blinken to be on a whirlwind tour of the allied nations of the United States in Europe. Do you think the allies have done enough, and has the United States done enough in putting enough financial pressure on the Russians to make this war costly for them?
They've certainly done a lot. Yes. It would help if, I feel a little bit in the position of someone living in the glass house throwing stones. To criticize India as such now a powerful, prominent player in the global stage, to put its own pressure on Russia rather than being relatively neutral in this. I say a glass house because the U.S. has certainly committed sins and errors of its own along the way, including involving your own country. But it would help if India weighed in a much more positive way, given the influence it has as a major player on the global stage now. But to get back to your question, yes, I think they put a lot of pressure, some of which Russia hadn't anticipated, such as pressure on the central bank, that may hurt the government, may hurt Putin, unfortunately will hurt common people, and may hurt and is aimed at hurting oligarchs towards, and this is my final point, towards one of two ends. It may involve, we could see Putin being unseated by the oligarchs or generals or his own intelligence services, conceivably, not likely, or another even more favorable, impact would be if Putin decides, as I said, to stop this invasion and to reach an accommodation with the Ukrainians, if he has some face-saving way of doing that. I'm not confident, I'm not positive by any means that either of those possibilities will play out, but we can hope.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed, Stephen Golub, for joining us and getting us all those updates there. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.